Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers about their work and the writing process, sometimes the publishing industry, the whole kit and caboodle. The show's available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms. And you can subscribe to either or both so you never miss a thing. And that is a hint, hint. Please hit subscribe. If you'd be so kind as to leave me a good review, that helps folks find the show. I'm going to remind you of that once more before we sign off as well, so don't hesitate there. I'm really excited today. My guest for today's show is one of the most highly regarded crime thriller writers in the world today. The books in his Van Shaw thriller series have won pretty much all of the major awards. They've received numerous starred reviews from all of the entities that do such things. They've been published in scores of languages around the world. You get the gist. Dude can write a bit. Best of all, he's a really nice guy to boot. And of course, I'm talking about the very talented Glen Erik Hamilton. Glen, hello. Welcome to the Open Mic. I'm so excited to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Remind me to have you write my epitaph or a eulogy. It sounds terrific. So,
Well, I think it's well earned. I mean, I am so like I said, I'm so thrilled to have you here because the Van Shaw series is really a big deal. And I want to start there because what I want to ask, you know, Van Shaw is in so many ways the very classic anti-hero. He does bad things, but almost always for a very good reason. And I love the anti-hero archetype anyway. I really do. It's probably one of my favorite of all of the things when I read. I read a lot about anti-heroes. How would you summarize, though, the series for someone who isn't familiar with your work?
yeah, it's funny that you call him an anti-hero because when I was first drafting the first book, before I even knew it was going to be a series, um, he was a true anti-hero in that doing bad things for bad reasons, right? And I realized it was much more interesting if in his past, in his youth, he had done bad things for bad reasons and now perhaps was putting those skills to use for the side of the angels, or at least as close to it as he can manage, right? I've always been attracted to characters who scrape a living on the fringes. Travis McGee is an obvious influence, obviously having grown up on board boats. But everything from even low rent private eyes to more modernly, Ed Brubaker has a series called Reckless, which is very much inspired by Travis McGee and is set in the Southern California in the 70s and 80s, where again, scraping by doing good deeds or favors for money for people. And so I started out writing him as an anti-hero, but I decided that having him be kind of a hero who was earning his wings was a lot more interesting. I did want him to be someone you could root for and whose motivations you could root for, even if his methods are not societally acceptable and maybe even has him question them from time to time. I like it when he makes a move, whether or not the move is effective or not, and then has to double think whether or not that was the right thing to do. He's done some things that after the fact he feels bad about, and then he has to question himself. And I think that's where the key to the character comes is, like all of us, he'll make a decision in the moment, and then he can second guess that later on and question whether or not he's really the good guy he thinks he is at this point.
Which is one of the things I really like about the character. One is that he's not superhuman. I mean, he's,
No,
we
I
read
didn't
these
want to
things
write a
where,
superhero.
guys
Yeah.
are practically immune to bullets and all that stuff. I mean, he's very
Mhm.
human, though he's skilled. I mean, he's a former Army Ranger. He's clearly
Yeah.
skilled, but he's not superhuman. And he's very human in that, as because we all question ourselves, no matter how much experience we have at things or what have you. I mean, I defy anybody out there to tell me you haven't woke up in the middle of the night questioning something that you said or did the day before. Come
Yeah.
on. So I really like that. He's a very
I think I
human.
think I think only sociopaths don't do that. Van is not a sociopath.
Yeah, clearly not. Um, I ask this of every fiction writer who comes on the show, whether they start their stories with characters or with plot. So I'm going to ask the same thing of you. Did you start all of this with him as the character that you started to build plots around, or did you have a plot in mind and you populated it with the character that you needed to create for it?
Yeah, I'll go either direction. Whatever is exciting, whatever strikes my fancy at the time. I mean, I often have ideas for particular action sequences or plot twists or reveals or the genesis of the scheme that he is uncovering, right? And so those plot points enter into the mix. But I also am usually starting the book, a new book, with deciding what are the decisions he has to make and the realizations he has to come to, and how does he change during the course of this? Because dogma doesn't interest me. I don't want to write the same character for 20 books. I want to write somebody who starts in book 1 at age 28, and maybe in book 20 he's 48 or 50, and not aging necessarily in real time, but certainly aging, and see how he changes. Who is the person he becomes as he gets older, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so looking at a new book, I will often have those sort of milestones that I'm aiming for. I'm sort of getting into the classic plotting versus organic writing, to use the newer term, right?
Yes.
Where I will often plot out a lot of major points that I want to get to. In between those, I will let myself wander a little bit, right? And so, and find my way to the next milestone on the trip that I need to get to. It both gives me a sense of security in that I know where the story's going and that I won't get off track, but it allows me a little bit of freedom that if a side character interests me, or if Van comes to a realization at some point, I've got freedom to follow that up. I don't have to have him chase the next clue right away necessarily, right?
Well, and I love that he is aging. I'm a huge fan of Tony Hillerman's Navajo Tribal Police series. I've read every Walter Mosley's Easy Rollins series, and several of his others. To me, it's more interesting that a character is aging and not just aging, but evolving, right?
Evolving. That's a good word for it. Yeah.
That's part of the human experience, and I think it really does humanize that character a lot more for the reader to have these, have people, as you say, maybe not in real time, but at least in a way that makes us feel, that evolution a little bit. I really wanted to ask specifically about the Van Shaw character, because I know every writer builds a little bit of themselves into their main protagonist. How much of Van Shaw, of his traits, are Glen Erik Hamilton traits too?
Well, I can't crack a safe, although I know a fair amount about cracking safes. I've never, I don't have the skill myself along the way. The first 5 books are in first person. The third book, because I wanted to be more of a thriller structure, branches out a bit and becomes third person, and gets away from just Van's viewpoint for a little while, for a variety of reasons. Mostly is flexing different muscles. But when you write a character for 5 books first person, you have to know that character particularly well. And especially with the first book, there's, obviously they're setting aside the wish fulfillment that I think we all might have when writing a protagonist. They're always quicker with a quip, more skilled, younger, stronger, all the rest of it, right? Setting aside all of that, a lot of Van's attitudes are my attitudes, right? But they're through a different lens. Van is, I think, less socially adept maybe than I am. He tends to be a little more standoffish, a little more suspicious. But that's just me mining that particular side of me, or the introvert side of me, a little more for Van. And so, there's definitely elements where we share, or the overlap in our personalities is pretty strong. But there are definitely deeper trenches that we get into with Van, or with me, if you want to turn it the other way, that where we wouldn't understand each other at all. And that's fun to write as well.
Well, so I've read you say that Van's situation has made you examine maybe your own uh, family history or family perceptions a little bit. Can you tell me a
Yeah.
little bit more about that?
Yeah, a little bit. It's funny because the last few times that I visited my parents, who live across the country now, um, we've spent some time going through photo albums and talking about family history and what they remember and what they were told, about the family history. Which is, as with every family, is pretty rich and deep, but not a lot was necessarily shared with them, was shared with their generation growing up. There was probably a lot of stuff going on with the family that they had to surmise or guess at. And that's made me sort of interested in Van, because having very little insight and knowledge of his own family history, what he's been told or what he barely remembers may not be the whole truth, may not be entirely accurate, right? Because it's all cobbled together from supposition, or what somebody was told 30 years ago, which it may just be a half memory that another relative had. And so, that's sort of, rich soil for Van exploring his own background, learning things about his own family, and in his own way, getting very dogged about digging up secrets that some people may not want dug up, that people might prefer to let lie because it doesn't make them look great of events that happened 40 years ago, right?
Well, it was
Not that
very,
not that there are deep dark secrets in my own family, but it is sort of the thing of, my folks have shared things about their parents or their relatives that they can only really guess what happened, because nobody was sharing that with the kids, right? Nobody was sharing the truth with the children. The children had to guess as to what exactly happened, right?
well, and to me, that's very relatable. Um, because I think you're right. That's a certainly kind of family I grew up in. Um, excuse me. I
Mm-hmm.
actually uh, didn't I didn't know my father either. So I think one of the things that the Van Shaw character resonated with me right away is that, I mean, I'm 59 years old. I only actually discovered my father about 4 years ago. And of course he was long deceased, right? And so that's the reason I asked that question, is because I know how that has impacted me in my life. So I find it interesting in this fictional character, seeing the impact that it's had on this character's life, to not have that connect, and to have the same thing, to ask questions, or you know, to have it to be a big mystery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it does seem to impact how he does things. Hey, so for me as a reader, I'm going, wow, this is kind of hitting home here, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
I
and
thought it
and
was just really great.
another aspect of that I like is that, having started not fully alone, but largely alone, just him and his grandfather for a long time, and his grandfather not being the most forthcoming of individuals, about how Van has realized that he's not a lone wolf, right? He has assembled families. He has assembled brothers in the Rangers. He has assembled, now that he's a civilian again, he has assembled Addie and Sindra and Hollis and the people he loves and are closest to him and will challenge him on his shit. Um, these are his family now, and he doesn't fight against that. That's one of the decisions I kind of made early on, is that No, no, he's not gonna, as taciturn as he can be, he knows himself well enough not to push these people away. He'll piss them off a lot, but he's not claiming to be some, Lone Ranger out on the prairie, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You noted that you were raised on a houseboat. You casually mentioned that, of course.
Sailboat, actually. Yeah.
Sailboat, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah. McGee was on a houseboat. Yeah.
How did that environment impact you as a writer?
Quite a bit. I mean, there's the there's the obvious choice of, because of the era, pre-internet. There's no cable on a boat, especially when the boat is out at sea. But even in the marina, there's no, even in the era of cable, there wasn't any cable. There was what you could get through rabbit ears, and that was it. Um, Reading was the primary pastime a lot of the times. And when I got bored with my own books, I raided my parents' books, probably at too young of an age to be reading that stuff. So there was a lot of that. So that there was that direct influence on how the boat environment affected it. There's also the fact that people who live aboard boats, right, correctly or not, tend to think of themselves as apart, right, as separate, right. That's why they live aboard boats, right. And you'll have the wide variety. You'll have the men who are newly divorced. You'll have the young families who have, or young couples who have a boat but don't have enough for a house yet. Or you'll have people like my family who just decided they wanted to live on a boat and do, right. And so it forms something of a community within the particular marinas or around the nearby harbors of people that of that sort. But there's always a certain remove from, regular folk, landlubbers, whatever you want to call them, of the folks who live aboard, thinking of themselves as different. And there's a different way of seeing things as well. When I think about how to get to Eagle Harbor, for example, I'm not thinking about a ferry. I'm thinking about where you go and where you anchor and the way we got there when I was a kid, right? When I think about Seattle, it's often from the water perspective. It's literally out on the water, going out Lake Washington, out into Lake Union, through the locks, and out into Puget Sound, right? That is a view of Seattle I have in my head from an early age. That is just my way of seeing the city, is by the waterways. The waterways are just another way to get around, like the freeways. I no longer live aboard or even own a boat, but through Van, I'm often thinking about how he gets around, and he'll get around by boat just as often as car half the time, right?
Well, and you mentioned Seattle, of course. My wife lived in Seattle for many years before we met, and she went to UW for grad school, and we go back quite a bit.
Another Husky, excellent.
Yes, another Husky. And we love the city. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. We have many, many friends there. And so I love that. I love when I see a book that's in that general area, anywhere in King County, upper Pacific Northwest, is just really fascinating to me. Tell me a little bit about Seattle, almost as a character. And, it's become almost a cliche when we talk about, the setting as character, but it really is true if it's done right. And of course, I feel you do it right. I guess there's two aspects to this question. Tell me a little bit about how you see Seattle and how it fits into the stories, but also, how do you avoid overdoing it, I guess, maybe, and taking to where it does become almost cliche as opposed to the reality of what that setting is.
Yeah. It's funny. I do have a fair number of scenes that are set around landmarks that people who barely know Seattle would be familiar with. That's not specifically to speak to that area of the audience, but it's just, if you owned a bar in Seattle and wanted it to be in a high traffic place, it might be near one of those landmarks. So it's just natural to have that be a part of the story. Having it, come from an organic place like that, a natural place like that, is a lot better. There's a scene in the latest book specifically where Van is on a date with someone who's from out of town. And she specifically says, let's do something touristy because I've never been here. Right. And he's like, well, I've never actually been up the Space Needle, as a lot of locals haven't. Right. That's not something you necessarily do as a local any more than a person in Manhattan is going to say, let's go up the Empire State Building today. Right. So they do that. Right. And the Space Needle has changed rather radically in the last few years. It's gotten a spacelift, as they call it, so it's a way of kind of showing this is the modern Space Needle and having a scene set in an interesting place, but not necessarily hitting the reader over the head with that. Because I thought that would be fun. Better than going to the market and watching them throw fish.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is the cliche now of Seattle.
Right. It is the cliche now, right? Ever since The Real World and all that, the credits of The Real World. So, but there's also aspects of Seattle, like, mentioning the water affects how people are able to get around or not, because you have to go over the bridges or around the water or whatever if you're not on a boat, and it affects the traffic radically. There's the economic aspects of Seattle, which were one of the reasons I originally wanted to write about it, is this ever widening gap now in Seattle between the haves and have-nots. It is becoming a city that's, in elements of it, are quickly becoming too expensive for locals to live there anymore. Because there's so much foreign and corporate money flooding in from many large corporations that and recruiting, that to buy a house in one of the main neighborhoods of Seattle now is at least seven figures, often up into the seven figures, depending upon the house and where it is. It's not a place that a lot of locals can afford to live. And so that economic impact interested me. And I thought that would be interesting as somebody who comes from a criminal background to explore a little bit. So there's that aspect of the city too, and how much it's changing.
Yeah, that's the story of a lot of cities right now. Boy, I just tell you, it's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it, but because I live fairly close to San Francisco, and so talk about a city that has changed and become absolutely unaffordable for quote unquote normal people.
Yeah, San Francisco is often the comparison I make, is that it's like there used to be local neighborhoods. A lot of those are getting pushed out now, and they're becoming something else. Yeah.
And it does make me wonder how that is going to impact storytelling. I hadn't really thought about it until we're talking about this just now, but I just really do wonder how it might change settings for writers, because you can't have, as an example, if you work at a grocery store in San Francisco, there's no way you're going home to your 3-bedroom, high-rise apartment in San Francisco working as a grocery clerk or something, right? That maybe in the 1930s that was possible, but not in the 2020s. I mean, it's insane, right? It's the same thing. And so I think it's like you watch a TV show and they show people that work at a coffee shop in Manhattan, but they also have this great apartment, in Manhattan. It's like, really? That isn't real.
Well, television is aspirational. I don't throw too many stones for that, because do we really want to watch reality on TV? don't we get enough of that?
Right.
Like, I'm okay with TV and films being a little aspirational and silly in that regard, just because I'm not necessarily watching it for verisimilitude.
Right. I referenced that, or maybe you did. Maybe you referenced that, you hadn't been an Army Ranger. But so tell me a little bit about the research that you do for stories. As I
Sure.
noted, I presume you also haven't been a lifetime professional thief. So, tell me a little bit about how
Not
you.
professional. I keep my amateur status so I can thieve for the Olympics someday.
Oh, well, there you
But
go.
yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Good. Well, how do you research these things so that you can bring that credibility to your writing?
Yeah, there's the best way is always to talk to people who actually do it, right? To interview police officers about criminals or people who have been criminals at the time. I have a few contacts who have been in special operations, the Rangers, as well as other branches, whom I will talk to about everything from. I will usually draft something and send it to them along with specific questions. But sometimes it just comes from interviewing. For example, Mercy River, the part of the premise of Mercy River is that there is a gathering of active and former Rangers in a small town in Oregon once a year. And that comes from, there is actually every 2 years, I believe it's held, there is the Ranger Rendezvous held in Georgia, which is close to two of the battalions there. That the Army holds. And so I got to think, and I was hearing stories about the Ranger Rendezvous from the acquaintances that I interviewed. And they were pretty funny stories and a lot of interesting. And it got to me thinking, well, what if there was one of those on the West Coast? And what if it was privately run for charity, right? It was like a charitable event. Because there is a Ranger battalion here at Fort Lewis McChord, the 2nd Battalion is here. 1st and 3rd are over in Georgia, which is why the rendezvous is there, because most people are there. What if there was one on the West Coast and it basically took over a small town every year, right? So that's where research can kind of generate story ideas along where I take something and I twist it a little bit, or I take a story and I exaggerate it or use it in some fashion. That's the best way. We are blessed with living in the time of the internet, right? So if I want to know more about, let's say, a particular tool or a particular weapon, I can often find video and schematics and other things available so that I can know, oh, here's what that weapon sounds like when it's fired. Here's what it looks like. Here's how that tool is used, right? If I'm just describing contractor work that Van and his grandfather did when Van was 16, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't really know how to pour concrete molds, or at least I haven't done that for a long time. Let me look that up and remind myself what that's all about. That's where the internet can be a blessing. Where it can be a curse is when you stop there, right? If you stop at just the internet for specific things, it's gonna be a little dry and it's probably going to be inaccurate. So whenever possible, you call somebody up, you talk to them, right? In the 5th book, I specifically have a federal task force that is made up of members of different branches of law enforcement. And to learn about that, I fortunately knew somebody who had been a federal prosecutor, and he was able to put me in touch with other people from branches of law enforcement who had worked on these sort of cross-departmental, cross-jurisdictional task force to tell me how they actually work. And that was very helpful. So, talking to real people about how stuff works is always the best way to go. You'll get, because you'll get the facts, but more importantly, you'll get the color commentary, right?
Yeah,
You'll get the
life into things for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if you watched a football game and it was just the play-by-play, it's a little dry. Color commentary exists for a reason. It's to give it color and background and shape and a story, right? Interviewing a person gives you the same thing.
Right. Well, I'll switch gears just a bit here because I know that you've also been an actor, and that's how you met your wife. And I did a lot of stage work when I was in college, and I even considered trying to make it a career when I was young and before I realized how expensive it is in LA.
Yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal. My wife is the brave one. I never tried to make it a profession.
Well, Tell me a little bit though about that connection. Do you still act at all? And if,
Mhm.
how does maybe that experience impact? How has that experience impacted your writing?
It's funny because I don't still act, but I plan to again someday. I acted right up until we moved to California in the mid around 2004, 2005. And was doing plays, just having a good time doing local and regional theater, and but never wanted to make it a profession. It was strictly for fun. And I moved to LA and I got to take a few months off before I had to look for a job. And being an actor in LA is very different than being an actor in Seattle. I'm sure some people are actors for fun in LA, but not a lot. I'm imagining most of the people who are acting there are trying to make a go of it professionally.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't interested in that. And, I'd been acting since I was a kid and enjoyed it, learned, got a degree in it, learned a lot from plays, doing plays and studying playwriting. Um, but when I got into writing, that fulfilled the creative impulses that acting had leveraged as well. And so since I've started writing, that's where my creative impulses go. Someday when I retire from the day job, I can fully see myself writing during the day and doing local theater again at night. Because there are times when I go to a play or watch something, on television, something like that, and that bug itches again. That bug bite itches again of like, boy, I wonder what it would be like now, 20 years later, to get back into acting and do parts that I'm now old enough to do that I wasn't at the time, right? I think that would be a lot of fun. Acting is a lot of fun because it's a lot of letting go, right? In writing, you are the director and you are God, and you can make everything happen the way you need it to happen. But the best parts of writing are when you know where it's going and it's just flowing. Those are sometimes few and far between, but those are those great moments. And it's the same sort of feeling with acting too, where you know the lines, you know the scene, you've rehearsed it enough, and now you're just writing those emotions as they come, right? Letting it happen on stage or getting energy from the audience. And it's that same sort of flow that I'm sure you've experienced this too, where it goes to a place you weren't necessarily expecting. And that's the joy of live theater.
It's fun. There's just no other way to describe it.
Yeah, it's
There's
pure fun.
nothing.
I would never want to direct theater. It's way too much work.
No.
And I don't see the joy in that. The joy is being able to just get on stage and surf, right?
There's nothing like it. There is nothing like walking on stage when you're doing a play. There really isn't. I don't know how to describe it to people who haven't done it. So many people think that sounds like the worst possible thing that could ever happen to them. And I get it if it's not your thing, but if it is your thing, there is a rush that comes from that and a sense of satisfaction when when you've put on a good show that is just, there's nothing else like it.
Yeah.
There's really
And
not.
I recommend often to writers, who are starting out is, read books, certainly, because you'll learn prose structure, you'll learn, countless lessons from reading prose. Read some plays too, because plays are just dialogue, right? For the most part. And so if you want to study dialogue, study some classic plays, make them as modern as you can, preferably not terribly avant-garde unless you're writing that style for your fiction. Try to find plays where people are actually having a conversation and have a point of view and they're driving that. But it will teach you how people talk in and around and over each other trying to make their point.
Absolutely. Well, sticking with acting for just a moment, I understand that you're a devotee of Columbo. So
Oh yeah.
I'm curious if you've seen the new Peacock series, Poker Face, and if so, what you think of it?
I love it. It's fantastic. We got interrupted actually by Left Coast Crime because we're all watching it as a family together because our daughter is old enough to really enjoy it too, and she's loving Charlie Cale. So we're only about halfway through because we're deliberately taking it slow, right? We're not binge watching it because we want to enjoy it. We want to like get deep into it. So now that we're back from Left Coast and some of the travels the family's doing, it's hard to get all four of us in place at one time. Once all four of us are in place at one time, we'll probably watch the remaining 4 or 5 episodes pretty soon. But I'm loving Poker Face a lot. It clearly, Ryan Johnson said this. He's a big Columbo fan. Natasha Lyonne is a big Columbo fan. So the influence is right there in the opening font, which is just like Columbo in the old days. They're not being shy about the influence of that, and I'm enjoying that a lot.
Well, one of the things one of the reasons I brought up that question is because I think it's part of the storytelling. As someone who grew up in the 70s, I recognize that font right off the bat, right? And it really subconsciously, well, not so subconsciously, clearly they mean to, but it really does give you a sense from the beginning how this is going to go. It really does set in your mind what you're going to see to some extent. And Natasha Lyonne is just fantastic.
She's wonderful. Yeah. She's terrific.
But so is everybody. I mean, Benjamin Bratt has been great. Everybody that's been in this has just been really great. I have so appreciated seeing this kind of storytelling, connected but still independent with each episode, and just such a care and craft to the storytelling, because it just feels like so much of serial television in this day and age, especially since everything's gone to streaming, relies so much on gimmicks and sadly violence and things like that that's all fine and dandy, but it's so nice to see something like this that's just clever, well written, and smart, and has and I hope it goes on for a while.
It does something too that I think is an important lesson or reminder for mystery writers, which is that the plot mechanics can be somewhat complicated, right? But the plot only happens because the characters are very specific, making choices that those characters would make, right? It's very clearly they did not come up with a great idea for a plot and then plug in generic characters to move them like game pieces on a board and have that happen, right? They had an idea for a plot, or they had the idea for the characters and figured out how those could work together in a seamless and natural fashion, right? In other words, the way that the villain kills someone in episode 2 is not the way that a villain kills someone in episode 4. And the motivations aren't the same, and the way they try to cover it up isn't the same, right? They're very character specific choices that those characters are making.
Absolutely. I love it. Real quick question. That's another one I ask a lot of writers. How long did it take you from the time you started to get the first Van Shaw book, which was Past Crimes, which I believe came out in 2015?
Yes.
How long did it from beginning to when that came out? Do you have a drawer full of unsold manuscripts like most authors do?
I don't. But I have a bunch of starts and abandoned subplots of Past Crimes, right? So, there are a lot of dead ends. Around the time that I started getting really serious about writing, taking classes and whatnot, was about 2008. I remember because my wife was pregnant with our daughter at the time, and there was a lot of bed rest time. And so I had plenty of time to sit in front of the computer and work on drafts, right? While we were just hanging out at home. So that was about the time I got serious, and I got into a facilitated writing class, writing group that met every week, and every week that group brought 10 pages. You could bring up to 10 pages, and you'd read them out loud. You'd bring copies for everybody. You'd read them out loud. People would make notes. They would give short commentary, and then we'd go to the next person. And so I sort of described that as grad school 10 pages at a time, right? Creative writing, because the level of quality of the writing in the group was very high. It was facilitated by an established mystery writer, a Geraldine Farmer, and who gives great instruction. It was actually taking a class from her at UCLA Extension that clued me to the writing group in the first place. So I did that. And so around 2013, 5 years later, is about when I had a manuscript that was ready to show. And long story shortening, the path from showing it to getting a book deal was very quick. I had a book deal before the end of 2013, and the book came out in early 2015.
Well,
so it was about five. To go back to your original question, it was about 5 years of that.
Well, I'll tell you though, for anyone who's paying attention here, that is a testament though to how good that manuscript was, and I'm ensconced in past crimes right now, and I'm telling you, it really is good.
Thank you.
You are truly one of the really gifted people doing crime thriller mystery genre today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to do a new thing here. I've only got a couple others, but this is a new thing. I'm going to hit you with a lightning round. This is what I'm going to call my lightning round.
Excellent.
And then just 1 or 2 word answers to these, if possible, or the shortest version you can give any of these. I've just got real quick ones here.
Sure. I won't explain the answers. I'll just throw them out. So
there you go. Outliner or pantser?
Outliner.
Word or page count per day?
Word.
How many words?
Full day?
Yeah, full day.
1,500.
Excellent. This will be harder. Best or worst writing advice that you've got?
Best writing advice: read a lot, honestly. Alternatively, read out loud. Read your own stuff out loud. Worst writing advice. Let me circle back to that one. It'll come to me. Okay. Let me let my subconscious brew on that. I'm sure there's some doozies. So yeah.
The feeling when you hit the end on a manuscript.
Exhalation.
And the next Van Shaw book, when?
That one I have to explain a little bit.
Okay.
My longtime editor, or my editor for my first 6 books, recently took a new job at a different publishing house. So I am at the moment a nomad, a man without a home, and I am working on a standalone. However, that said, I have the start of a new Van book, and a very good idea of the outline of that Van book and where it goes that I'm pretty excited about. Whether or not that's with the same publishing house, whether it's with another different publishing house, we will have to see. So I don't know when, but I can answer the if. And the answer to if is yes. I will definitely write this book at some point. But at this point, being temporarily adrift and working on something different, I'm not sure exactly when a deal will be made for the next Van.
Good answer. Okay, I'm gonna let you circle back. Worst writing advice.
Oh, worst writing advice is I feel is don't read while you're writing, because I think that's a trap, right? I'm sure it works for some authors who may perhaps delve deep into a book and write very, very quickly. But for me, reading while I'm writing is essential, not from any imitative standpoint, but literally to give my brain a break from my own voice and hear somebody else's voice for a while.
I like that. Okay. I always like to end on what I intend to be a fun question. I hope it's a fun question. There is always a little bit of a through line through my options I'm about to give you, but as always, let's just say I had the magical power to put you together with one of these three people for whatever, dinner, drinks, conversation, whatever you want. But you can only choose one.
Okay.
The options I'm going to give you are the late Kurt Cobain, Rainn Wilson, who most people know better as Dwight Schrute from The Office.
I've met Rainn very, very briefly at a book event a year or so ago.
I always wonder when I give sometimes I always
just literally in passing, he would not remember. I remember because he was the keynote speaker. So
excellent. Or Captain Kristen Griest, who was one of the first two women to ever graduate from the U.S. Army's Ranger School.
Oh, well, then this one is easy. I would definitely love to chat with Captain Griest. To hear her experiences, that would be fantastic conversation. So she would probably be bored of me hitting her for details on what that's like, but the specificity of that, not just learning the specifics of what her Ranger School experience and things were like, but it would probably be a better conversation once she's out of the service and can speak more freely.
Right.
But learning the specificity of what it was like to be one of the women who was able to allowed to complete that, I should say, because there's a lot of allowing that goes on in the sense of whether we allow women in special operations, right? I have to be clear about that. Not allowing in the sense of we're changing the standards to get them in, but literally the service is changing their way of thinking and providing that opportunity to the women who are serving, right? Yeah, but I would adore talking with that. I'm sure I could probably have a good conversation with Kurt Cobain, but it would probably just be about Seattle places that we both haunted in the late 80s. So
well, Glenn, this has been fabulous. I really appreciate you coming on the show. As always, I didn't say in the intro, we had the opportunity to sit together for a bit at Left Coast Crime in Tucson earlier this year, and it was a real joy to meet you and your wife, and a lot of great storytellers at Left Coast. We were all sitting around enthralled with David Putnam telling cop stories, and it was a lot of fun. And I was thinking right then on the spot, man, I gotta have all you guys come on the show and talk about some of these things. And you haven't let me down, man. This has been
excellent.
Great. Really,
Rich, this has been terrific. Thank you.
Love hearing your perspectives on this stuff. So, and for anyone who hasn't discovered Glenn's work, by all means, go pick up a Van Shaw book and enlighten yourself, because you're going to really love it. He truly is one of the best crime fiction thriller writers in the world today, and so a real honor to have you on the show. One more time, I promised you folks out there that I was going to hit you up to subscribe. So please do that. Hit subscribe now, whether you're on the podcast or the YouTube channel. It does help other people find the show, especially if you leave a review, which is really the main goal. Please leave a review. That helps people find the show. And I think anyone that's interested in writing, or just as a great reader, would really love to have a chance to hear writers in their own words talking about how it is they do what they do. So please do me the solid and hit subscribe and leave a review. You can do it at a podcatcher of your choice or on our YouTube channel. Glenn, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Rich.
Absolutely. And I am going to leave you all with the same thing that I leave you with every week. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please, whatever you do, make today count. Until then, I am Rich Eisen. This has been The Open Mic, and we'll see you next time around.